Hi everybody. In this video, we're going to take a look at the strengths and weaknesses of three of the best real-time rendering softwares on the market. We'll examine the strengths and weaknesses of Lumion, Twinmotion, and D5 Render. And what we're looking at here is not necessarily determine which software is the best, but merely to look at them through a critical lens, identifying the features that they're very strong on and identifying some of their structural weaknesses. This video is hopefully intended to educate people on which software may best fit their needs or which software they may want to add next to their toolkit or introduce at work. We should also point out, this is not an attempt to identify the best software. If you want to know the best rendering software right now, it is almost unequivocally the Unreal Engine 5. However, that may not be the best software for you. The Unreal Engine is capable of producing amazing results, but it also comes with a very steep learning curve. And for a lot of people involved in visualization, you may not have the time to dedicate to learning an entirely new rendering engine, or learning the ins and outs of a game engine in particular. And for this reason, we do utilize real-time rendering software. These are designed to be accessible and relatively easy to pick up for newcomers. In fact, ease of use is going to be one of the features that we look at in this video, and one of the features that we criticize. For most people, we don't need a full game engine. We just need something that can import our objects and can make really stunning artwork with. In addition, best is also somewhat subjective. You can make fantastic renders in any of these three software that we're going to examine, and other software that we haven't got a chance to look at, including things like Enscape or V-Ray, which we hope to look at going forward, especially over this coming summer. But what matters more, though, is still your artistic eye and your ability to compose great shots. And that's something that software can help with, but ultimately really comes down to the user. With that being said, let's go ahead and get into it. Okay, everybody. So the first thing we want to talk about with D5 Render is the real-time nature of the engine. Quite simply, what you see is what you get. And D5 is a ray-traced rendering engine straight out of the box. It doesn't require hitting a special button, and it doesn't require adding a ray trace module. Quite simply, everything you see on the screen is being ray traced in real time, which is, if you've been doing 3D for any bit of time, is still pretty impressive and kind of a staggering achievement. It is built originally on the Unreal Engine 4 that has subsequently been built on top of the Unreal Engine 5, and it features real-time ray tracing, as well as an optimized global illumination solution, which means the way light behaves should be realistic. It also means that shadows should behave realistically as well. And you can see in our test sample scene here, you can see the effect of this. As I move around the scene, you can see that the reflections and the glass is all basically functioning fully realistically. Straight out. You don't have to do anything special. You can see glass is going to behave correctly, as are the shadows in your scene. So in terms of real-time performance, D5 is absolutely fantastic. If it looks good in your viewport, then it's going to look better when you actually render it, for the most part. When it comes to real-time performance in Twinmotion, Twinmotion has the benefit of featuring a standard rasterized engine as well as the newer path tracing engine as well. And these are built into Twinmotion. You can render using Twinmotion's default rasterized engine, which is going to be kind of affected by what you see in the viewport. This is more akin to those of you who've been doing or using real-time rendering software in the past. You may also notice there's a bit of a discrepancy between what you see in the final renders versus what you see in the viewport. So let's talk about the rendering quality of Lumion. My argument would be in exterior shots, Lumion far surpasses many of the other raster-based render engines out there. My preference for exterior rendering over using Lumion or using the raster element within Twinmotion would be to use Lumion. The way it handles light is, in my mind, better. The use of skylight and hyperlight combined do make for very, very nice end results. In fact, for exterior rendering, I'm not convinced that the ray tracing solutions or the path tracing are in fact any better. And quite simply, artistically and visually, I think Lumion for exterior shots has yet to actually be beaten. One other element of D5 that's important to talk about is the overall rendering quality. Quite simply, it's incredibly high. For those who are very, very, very good at D5, the results are often, to my mind, somewhat comparable to what you get in more traditional offline renders. Now, that is obviously my opinion and a little bit subjective, but quite simply, the overall result of D5 rendering is really, really good. And oftentimes, you can get renders in D5 that look fantastic without having to use a huge amount of post-processing in Photoshop. The other thing that's important to note about D5 render is the speed at which it renders. For example, this scene on a 4K monitor, which is what we're looking at right now, will render incredibly fast if I set it to make a 2K picture. Even setting it to a 4K picture results in D5 doing a pretty stellar and almost immediate job of rendering. In fact, the render quality can go pretty high too. If we go to our render settings here, we can go from 2, 4, 6, 8, all the way up to 16K renders. And by all accounts, the rendering speed is very, very impressive. Twinmotion does also come with a fantastic path tracer engine. So if we go ahead and hit OR on the keyboard, you can see here what we're going to get is the path traced updated version of this render. Light is going to behave in a more natural and realistic fashion, and materials will also be higher fidelity. Quite simply, it's a better lighting paradigm. And what's really interesting is you can toggle between these and you can both render with them on or off. You can also export renders featuring the raster engine or the path tracing engine. Now, it does seem very likely that the gold standard going forward is going to be the path traced version of Twinmotion. So what you have is the older architecture, and integrated into that is the newer path tracing render engine. And I think the results from the path tracer are absolutely fantastic. The path tracer in Twinmotion produces sublime results. They really are fantastic. Lumion 2023 did introduce ray tracing to Lumion users, but in its current form is still best thought of as a work-in-progress module that sits upon the traditional raster engine. Ray tracing has not been fully integrated into Lumion just yet, and after 2 years of progress, it still remains in a beta version. Right now we're on 0.9, but with the new update system, Lumion users can probably look forward to more frequent and more regular updates throughout the entire year. One of the other features of D5 that I think is particularly strong is the asset library. If we hit M on our keyboard, we can go ahead and bring up our asset library tab, and that'll be found here under the assets. We've got particles, materials, and models. Now, here's the thing. The asset library is located in the cloud. It is stored offline, and so you can actually download these assets. You don't have to download anything that you don't want. Merely pick the ones you want. There'll be a short download, and then you can bring them into your scene. Now, this keeps the install for D5 pretty light by all accounts, But what really makes this good is a number of features. Firstly, the sheer amount of objects. For example, under the Nature tab alone, you have over 3,000 different model types, and they are continually updated with new models, which is really, really nice. You don't have to wait for the next release to get access to new models. There's a huge variety of nature objects, from trees to various shrubs to hedges. But for me, one of the most important things is under the Accessories tab. It's really important to have really good models in your scene. And in fact, one of the things that can make or break a good render is objects that look poor or are low poly. The Accessories tab in D5 features about 1,000-ish models, and they're all of a really, really high quality. Let's go ahead and download this little bear here and take a look. You can see there's a brief download period, and then we can bring this into our scene. And you can see whether looking at this couch or looking at the bear model itself, the standard is really, really high. The objects within the D5 library are all modern. They look really good. They do seem to be optimized for D5, and they're relatively new looking. Some of the other asset libraries do feature objects that haven't aged well. One of the cooler features of this is that a lot of the model assets are actually customizable. Let's download this European head model and place it right here. Now, what I mean by that is you can go in and change the materials on many of these models, something that other software doesn't necessarily let you do. So I can grab a material here, and let's go ahead and we'll just pick this black matte metal, and I'm going to apply that to this model. There we go. And you can see it updates in relative real time, and I think that looks so very, very cool. In addition, the asset library in D5 also features a huge array of other objects that are very good for building your scenes. We have interior and exterior models, we have decals for adding wear and tear to your scene, and we also have a wide array of other useful objects. For example, we have interior parallax. These can be dropped into a scene to make your buildings look a little bit more lived in without you having to manually do this. So we can drop in a simple plane like this. Let's place that in our scene, and I'll rotate it. And you can see the interior parallax will give the impression of depth, give the impression of really that there is a 3D element within your scene, but with a very low overhead in terms of performance. All in all, the D5 asset library is, in my opinion, probably the best real-time asset library out there. It's been the feature that I've enjoyed using the most outside of the quality renders in D5, and I think it is very much worthwhile paying for the Pro subscription. There are a couple of features that you need to be aware of. The first is that, like a lot of real-time engines, Twinmotion does come with an Objects Library tab. Now, my opinion on this is there are some features that are really good with this and some that are kind of poor. For example, the number of assets and the quality of them has seen a steady increase. We now have access to a more diverse range of objects, including gym objects and musical and also office. So there's a lot more stuff in the library. This is particularly true for exterior scenes, for city features, for example, everything from planters all the way up to just signs. One area that I find it severely lacking, though, is in internal decorative elements. So if we go to the library here and we look at, for example, the living room, and we look for decorations, this is a pretty limited, let's turn off the path tracing there, an extremely limited decorative library. They have added some new stuff, like these books are really appreciative and they look really good, and some of the other elements are really, really nice. If you need a lot of books in your scene, great. But in terms of actual decorative elements, the things people would have on walls, for example, or that they might have just sitting on shelves, Twinmotion doesn't have a huge amount of that. And I think that's a bit of a shame. The other thing that's really, really amazing about assets in Twinmotion is access to the Megascans library. I'm going to go through this in depth, but the Megascans library gives you access to a huge amount of objects from the Quixel megascans. Now, Twinmotion and Quixel are both owned by Epic, so it does make a lot of sense that they are integrated into the same program. And this gives you access to a huge amount of objects and a huge amount of 3D surfaces, or otherwise known as materials, for your scene. And that alone is really, really impressive. They're all available here. Buildings, for example, we could grab these objects and download them into our scene immediately. Or the surfaces, we can download the 2K version of these surfaces directly into Twinmotion. Let's click on marble, let's click on tile, and I'm going to go ahead and download this patterned marble tiles right here. You can see it downloads pretty fast. Drag it into my scene, and there we go. Just like that, create a beautiful surface for your renders. This is still, to my mind, pretty incredible that you can do this. It removes the very laborious task of having to download surfaces, extract them, and then manually load them into your scene, which is kind of a pain. This streamlines the entire process. Now, the other thing to know about assets when it comes to Twinmotion is the availability of the Sketchfab models. Sketchfab has also been integrated within Twinmotion going back at least 2022, I believe. So you can see if you're looking for something, we can download specific Sketchfab models. Let's go to animals and pets, and I'm going to just pick this little elephant. I'm going to download it. Now, to my mind, this is still incredibly cool. I mentioned in another video, it's unlikely that those of you involved in architectural visualization are really going to utilize the Sketchfab library all that much. It seems like there's a lot of content, possibly too much content, and a lot of time might be spent narrowing down the focus, finding just the thing that you're actually looking for. But if you're a Twinmotion user and you've used it a lot, just say something in the comments and let me know if there's a way to do it faster. It's incredibly cool, but unlikely to be utilized by a lot of people involved in architectural visualization. But in terms of asset library, it gives you a huge amount. You've got at least 3 different sources of assets, and that's just within Twinmotion, which all in all is pretty impressive. One of the best features of Lumion has always been the asset library that comes pre-installed with Lumion. And if we take a look down here on the bottom left, you can see we have a huge array of tree models, foliage, and vegetation that can be added to your scene. They're neatly arranged, and the asset organization system is really very good. You have access to everything from broadleaf trees to conifers to palm trees, leafless trees, and we also have a wide array of people and human assets, animals, as well as vehicles and decorative elements. Now, to my mind, some of these assets, particularly the vegetation and foliage, are some of the best in the 3D industry. They look fantastic. Let's take a quick look at just a nature tab asset right now and just bring something in. So this is an American beach asset. And we can go ahead and just look at this. Now, if we spin our sky and really get a good look at the foliage and just how this actually looks. Let's turn on our real sky, and I'm going to spin that, and you can see just how good the greenery looks. Many of the greenery assets are also animated and will respond to the wind speed setting. So there's a lot to love about this. Now, one of the areas that Lumion does fall down to my mind in terms of asset library is the interior objects. Some of these have aged pretty well, and some of them are newer. We can type in 23. One of the major selling points is this huge library, and it is a huge asset library, does come as a part of your Lumion price. It is built into Lumion, and outside of finding more modern decorative elements, you have everything that you need to build an entire scene pre-installed in Lumion. We have foliage, people, equipment, vehicles, all the things that you might need to build up either urban or rural architectural scenes. And truly, I cannot emphasize this enough. The foliage library and the ability to add and drop in a wide variety of foliage and trees and vegetative assets It's just incredible. One of the benefits of real-time engines or real-time rendering software is ease of use. You should be able to pick them up relatively quickly and get pretty solid results without having a steep learning curve or without having to learn a huge amount of technical detail. As we mentioned at the top, if you want to really get into the nitty-gritty, there are offline rendering solutions, or go ahead and learn a full game engine like the Unreal Engine 5. But for a lot of our purpose, you just want something that you can pick up and get going with pretty quickly. So let's look at D5 first. The thing you'll notice is the interface is extremely streamlined. There is not a huge amount of things that you need to be aware of. And what I mean by that is older programs that often had clunky interfaces or had nested menus. We have basically file controls over here, access to our asset library in the top left, a layer panel on the left, and an objects on the bottom left. Other than that, we have just the environmental controls for weather and the geo and sky, basically the lighting system, and then we have our effects tab. Quite simply, there isn't a huge amount of complexity to the interface. And because D5 is a real-time ray traced engine, as we mentioned, what you see in the viewport very highly correlates with what you'll get in your finished render. This makes D5 one of the easier programs to use. There's not a lot that you need to be mindful of. There are some things that are not made clear, for example, the importance of the auto exposure button, which is something I think D5 needs to emphasize. But for the most part, the interface is very quick to navigate and doesn't represent a very steep learning curve at all. When it comes to the ease of use of Twinmotion, my opinion is that if you've been using the older versions of Twinmotion, then the interface was, to my mind, very clunky and a little bit outdated. Now, there was a lot of nested menus, and there was an awful lot of content functionality that was hidden really behind the interface that only suited people who'd been using it for a long time. If, however, you're using Twinmotion 23 onwards, then it is a complete game changer. The interface has been streamlined and optimized, and in many ways updated. Working in Twinmotion, particularly the 23 versions onwards, right now has become incredibly nice to work with. The objects are readily available to you on the left side, and the tabs on the bottom, these 5 buttons on the bottom of the screen, make finding and working with your scenes a lot easier. It's easy to figure out your materials, how to import objects, and how to paint objects if you need to. On top of that, the key for me now is the use of the ambience button. By just touching that, we get access to all of the weather controls, the environment controls, and the camera controls all in one easy location. And I think this has really helped. By updating the interface, Twinmotion has really brought itself back into the fold. It's updated, it's cleaner, it's newer looking, and it's an absolute dream to work with. In terms of ease of use and your ability to pick up Lumion and get in there and start producing really beautiful content, Lumion has one of the easiest learning curves in any software. Quite simply, in my case, students are very quickly able to learn the ropes of how to import content, how to bring objects into Lumion, especially using the Lumion Live Sync, which is available for a lot of different software, and are quickly able to populate a scene. They're quickly able to apply materials and apply textures and use the inbuilt assets to produce nice renders. In terms of its ease of use, a lot of it is due to the interface. It's incredibly clean, it's logically laid out, and there is some really nice iconography that will help new users. When it comes to the hardware for D5, you can see that as of some updates recently, the minimal requirements have actually been dropped. You can run D5 on an NVIDIA GTX 1060 card which is actually a pretty old card at this point. Now, as with the other software though, realistically, to get the most out of these softwares, you do not want to be running them on something that is really kind of old at this point and is going to struggle. Quite simply, you do want to try and get the best hardware that you can. And while it's not necessarily to run the top-end, most expensive graphics cards out there, I've had more success running D5 on my 3090s at work than my 3070 here at home. Quite simply, hardware is always going to benefit you as you go further up the ladder. And so please keep that in mind. All of these softwares, while they do have a minimum cutoff, you really don't want to be aiming for that. Try and get the best hardware that you physically can and that you can afford, and try and find the fine balance between the hardware expense and the return on investment. So let's talk about price for D5. And the first thing that you need to be mindful of is there is no real trial version of D5. Instead, there is the entirely free community version. You can see in the community version, you have almost everything featured within the standard paid for or pro D5 license, just losing out on some of the widgets which allow you to do some various things within D5 and losing access to the asset library. Now, again, there are a lot of people out there who use the free version of D5, and it is free for commercial use just by using their own assets and bringing in their own assets into D5. Other than that, though, it is completely free and open to the community, which is very, very cool. Overall, the Pro plan is $360 per year, or about $38 US a month. Now, I think this is fantastic value for money overall, especially considering what you're actually getting. You get a fantastic ray-traced real-time engine whose results can nearly rival and come very close to, in my mind, the offline rendering quality. It may not be V-Ray or Corona rendering just yet, but it's absolutely getting there. And I think that's a worth investment in and of itself. The other thing is you get access to, if you're paying for it, the professional library. Access to the cloud library for materials and assets, I think in my mind, is very much worth it. Combine that with the overall quality of the rendered images and the incredibly smooth animation tools, I think for $360 a year, D5 is an absolute steal. It's very much a bargain. And I truly can't recommend it on pricing. I just cannot recommend it enough. I think everyone should download the trial, download the community version, and I think you should give it a spin. When it comes to the hardware requirements for Twinmotion, kind of consistent with the other software, they can be quite high. Now, kind of a takeaway from this would be that any sort of rendering projects at this point do require pretty hefty hardware, and the same is true for Twinmotion. You can get away with using something that's in the middle range here between the minimum requirements and the high-end requirements. But quite simply, you do want to go for the strongest graphics card that you can afford. Quite simply, go for one with a large amount of VRAM, and preferably the newest graphics card that you can get. You can see that on the Twinmotion website, their high-end requirements are quite hefty. They do want at least a 12 gigabyte or more VRAM card, or one that has a pretty high benchmark score. Now, please also note that for the path tracer in particular, you do need really a NVIDIA or AMD card. As of now, Intel Arc cards are not supported. When it comes to the pricing for Twinmotion, you've got a number of options. For our purposes, we are interested in the commercial license. This is the professional license for Twinmotion, and that allows you to export up to really as high as Twinmotion can go, which I think is about 16K at the moment. You get access to all of the features, and it is viable for commercial products. Now, I should point out, I bought Twinmotion a good number of years ago, and every update has thus far been free for me. Now, I don't know how long that's going to go on for. You can see it does say free upgrades for 1 year from purchase. However, I haven't actually bought Twinmotion in a very, very, very long time. So this policy may change, but for $500, you are getting a program that can do raster work, can do very, very nice path tracing work, has built-in access to the Quixel Megascans library, seems to be improving at a staggeringly fast rate, has access to the TwinFab library, and all in all, it's just a joy to work in. When it comes to Lumion's hardware requirements, it does have one of the steepest hardware requirements of any of the software that we've looked at. And more troublingly, the hardware requirements do seem to be getting higher. You can see that technically speaking, the minimum requirements are not that challenging. In fact, most gaming dedicated PCs really over the last number of years will probably meet these requirements. However, if we actually look at the recommended and the high end in particular, and if you're using Lumion, you really do want to push for the high end requirements, you can see that the graphics card memory in particular is very, very high. You're looking at high end RTX 30 series and into the 40 series. Now, this to me is a little bit puzzling. Even the system memory and RAM is really quite high. Now, there are many people who probably won't find these requirements very, very high, and I do understand that. But as baseline standard users go, this is pretty high. And I think Lumion may have fallen prey to the idea of hardware or feature creep, a constant upwards trajectory for the requirements for their software. One thing to keep in mind, though, when talking about Lumion system requirements, is to remember who Lumion is for. Larger architectural firms are not necessarily as constrained by the price of hardware as more generalist users. And as such, Lumion is intended for firms whose hardware requirements are constantly being updated and who probably have the budget to afford increasingly restrictive hardware costs. So let's talk about pricing. As it currently stands, you've got a couple of different options here. With Lumion, you can do a 1 or 3 year subscription, and you can pay for the lower value, the $54 Lumion Standard, or the more expensive Lumion Pro. And you do want to be using the Lumion Pro version, as this unlocks all of the asset library and rendering effects. Quite simply, if you're going to use Lumion, pay for the Pro version. And the question then is, what do you get for that? Well, firstly, you get one of the most accessible render engines on the market, capable of producing the most stunning exterior renders on the market, in my opinion. You also get a vast array of ready-to-go assets available out of the box without having to buy asset packs or really download additional models from random places online. You do also get access to a very easy-to-use interface, and due to the live sync, which is really very good on Lumion, the changes you see are available in real time. Lumion is very accessible and is probably best suited to those who do not have a background in traditional 3D work, or for whom a lot of the terminology is not well known or understood. In addition, you get amazing controls for video. In fact, Lumion can produce some pretty good videos. You get fantastic support through Act 3D, support that I've actually mentioned in other videos on this channel. You do have to question, though, whether the ray tracing as it currently exists in Lumion is worth the investment. Now, the argument here could be that it is maybe too little too late, or it could be that this is a transition period. My argument would be maybe the latter, that this is a transition period. It might be a little rough, but the overall results in time will be worth it. Animation in D5 is a joy to work with. It's pretty easy to create clips. We can simply add a camera, move our camera and reposition our shot, and then add another camera. We have the ability to easily adjust the time. And one of the joys is that when you work with D5, what you see in the clips is exactly what you're going to get. It has genuinely the most accurate clip to final output of any rendering software that I've come across. It's very easy to assemble multiple clips just by adding new clips, and we can go ahead and just change the position of our camera, and again, maybe add another camera as well. You also have the ability to batch export video, which makes it very simple to set up a project and walk away and leave it running, safe in the knowledge that what you'll come back to is exactly what you set up with your clips. Now, there is still always the possibility of things like flickering, but this remains an issue for I think every 3D rendering software that's producing video clips. Creating and exporting video in Twinmotion is very easy to do, particularly if you're using the older raster engine. We can go down to Media here, and you can see that just here on the left, we have the ability to click on video. We can create video snippets, and so you can see here, I already have one created. This is using the path tracer, but if I turn that off, you can see we can just hit the spacebar and run through our video clip. It's best to work in Twinmotion, like in D5, from a point of view of stringing together multiple clips instead of trying to create really dynamic camera changes. But it's really easy to do that in Twinmotion. We can just add a video here, and you can see when I do that and back out, it will keep track of my video clips for me. Rendering performance or speed for video clips using the non-path tracer version is also very, very quick. You have great control over the individual clips and the environment or ambience within those clips. One thing to note, however, if you intend to use Twinmotion's path tracer and render out video, there are a few caveats and things you need to be mindful of. The first is going to be the time. It takes a very long time to render using the path tracer. If you think of it as 24 frames per second, but each frame is actually a path tracer render, you can see how even rendering a 3-second clip can take quite a bit of time. The other issue is going to be noise. The Twinmotion path tracer does utilize a denoising algorithm after the tracer has done its job. One issue with this is each time you run a render, the denoiser algorithm is going to give differing results, and this results in some video noise. Now, you can try and turn that off and run a separate denoiser in another software, but I personally don't think that you should have to do that. And right now, some of the noise is really, really difficult to work around. Without a doubt, Lumion has the best array of video and clip editing tools available in the rendering software that we're looking at. It has the ability to produce very, very nice movies, again, using a clip-based system, or you can record single large movies, but generally best approach it from a clip point of view. Lumion also has access to the widest array of options for video, including things like mass move, motion blur, and animated phasing, something that can be done in the other software, but Lumion makes it substantially easier. We also have the ability to do very advanced movements based on a path system. Now, this is something that the other programs do utilize, but Lumion gives you an enormous amount of control over the movement of the objects within your scene. One other thing to note, video clips in Lumion do also utilize the array of FX modifiers. So for example, if you do decide that you want to change the look and feel of your rendered image, or maybe add another effect, these can be applied on top of the effect stack and they will affect the entire video clip. In addition, Lumion 2023 also comes with a host of new camera abilities. This allows for more advanced camera movement, including pans and dollies when using Lumion for video. Hi everybody, if you've made it to this part in the video, thank you so much for watching. I hope you found the content interesting. And if you did, please think about either leaving a comment or subscribing to the channel. It's great encouragement to see the subscriber numbers go up and to have that really nice dialogue with people on the channel as well. With that being said, we do need to talk about some of the criticisms. And I'd like to frame these criticisms more as opportunities for growth for the software that we've discussed. And we really should, in many ways, be critical of the software that we use. The software is ultimately just a tool. Even though we might like some over others, it is just a means to an end. And ultimately, the tools are in many ways somewhat interchangeable, as what matters really for visual production and quality is still your own artistic eye. With that being said, let's go ahead and dive into some of the areas that D5 could potentially improve upon going forward. The first area that I believe needs improvement within D5 is the organizational structure for the asset library. There are some elements, particularly concrete, that really should be in their own category. And right now, there are materials that seem sort of badly placed or maybe sort of lumped together during the initial development of D5 and haven't really been organized or updated since. So that would probably be the first thing that I would focus on. The second issue is the HDRIs. Now, HDRIs are a fantastic way to light your scene in D5 and one of the two systems for lighting. However, the ability to move HDRIs and interact with them once they're in your D5 scene is still relatively limited. Now, I understand from a developer comment on the D5 forum that this is actually much harder than people realize to actually move a HDRI around. However, Twinmotion does seem to have solved that issue, and you have much greater control. You also have a much larger HDRI library to choose from. And I think that's something that the D5 team should look at, is purchasing additional HDRIs and giving them to the users. This will prevent us having to use third-party websites or third-party software to get HDRIs to light up your scene. The next area of growth for D5, to my mind, is to do with performance. There does seem to be some issues with your D5 scenes, or at least I've noticed, whereby performance seems to degrade. In other words, it goes down the longer that you have D5 open and the more you use it. Now, one quick workaround for this is to quite simply save your project, go take a break, turn back on your project, and performance will improve. But I'm not entirely sure what's causing this. Memory usage does seem to go up the longer D5 is open. Now, this may just be a bug and it may be patched out in the next version of D5, but as it currently stands, the version 2.4 does seem to have come with a host of bugs and issues. And there's a good possibility that its release could have been delayed by a few months just to improve the quality before it was put out. So let's take a critical look at Twinmotion 2023 and see the areas that need improvement or need to be looked at in my mind. The first is the path tracer. Now, the path tracer is absolutely fantastic, and I really do love using it, but there's no denying it is slow. If you want to really see the best results, you're going to need some pretty heavy hardware in order to utilize the path tracer to its fullest potential. Even running top-of-the-line graphics cards, you're probably still going to run into issues using the path tracer, even for just look development. Quite simply, by cranking the settings up too high, the results are very, very slow. It takes a long time to actually see Now, they have made improvements with this. You can drop the quality of the path tracer down in the viewport. You can also drop viewport performance down as well. And these things do definitely help, but it would be nice to see the path tracer improved to just be a little bit faster and as such, a little bit more responsive. One area that I see Twinmotion falling behind on, and this is something that D5 has been doing from the start, is actually the integration of triplanar mapping. So all the materials in Twinmotion will get mapped or applied to a surface using something like the basic UVs that come with the object, or maybe a spherical or cubic map. Triplanar mapping will help the mapping of materials to objects that don't have flat or basic shapes. It'll make your texture maps look better and hopefully look a lot more seamless. And this is something that D5 does right out of the box. And Twinmotion, Lumion, and a bunch of other softwares don't seem to have utilized it yet. My last area for growth with Twinmotion is actually to do with the older raster images. The path tracing system very much shows the limitations of the older system. Quite simply, the gap between the two images is incredibly pronounced, but there are a lot of users still using the raster system, particularly users on Mac, or those using older hardware that cannot use the RTX requirements for the path tracer. Now, one way you can address this is to improve the handling of light and shadows within the Twinmotion ecosystem. Quite simply, improve the look of the raster engine and hopefully make users stick with it for a little bit more time. And finally tonight, let's take a critical look at Lumion 2023. The big issue for most Lumion users, or those thinking about utilizing Lumion because it's incredibly user-friendly, is going to be price. Quite simply, the price is incredibly high. I understand that historically, the need and use of user-friendly architectural visualization software meant that you could charge a substantial amount for your software. But quite simply, competition and technology have made those points somewhat moot. Quite simply, as it currently stands, Lumion is an incredibly expensive proposition for anyone outside of an architectural rendering firm or someone whose use of Lumion is second nature to them, and there will be a learning curve for new software. It is very expensive. The next area that I think Lumion could stand to improve on is going to be no surprise to anyone, and that is the ray tracing as it's currently integrated into Lumion 2023. Quite simply, you cannot really call Lumion 2023 a ray traced engine. The ray tracing module that sits as a piece of the FX stack is not necessarily true real-time ray tracing. And in many ways, it may not have been intended to be like that, but the user base and the standard for architectural visualization is now looking for ray-traced images. And as it currently stands, the ray tracing in Lumion just is not there yet. It's incredibly slow. You need quite heavy hardware to produce anything with it. And the sample count has to be incredibly high to get very good images. In fact, on my 3070, the highest I was willing to shove the sample count up was 512, and even then, I got an optimization warning. This means that in its current version, ray tracing is probably not production ready. The third potential area of improvement for Lumion is still, oddly enough, the interface, even though it's incredibly easy to get. The third area that Lumion could stand to improve and grow is still the interface. It is still strange that in 2023, there isn't strictly a Control-Z undo button within Lumion. Each action still has to be manually undone using the undone tab. In other words, if you place a tree, you're going to have to undo that within the foliage tab. It's still a very strange system to me. And considering Lumion has said that the engine was completely reworked and rewritten from scratch for this version, I'm not sure why you would leave such basic functionality out. with that being said, we are done. I'm going to go ahead and leave it there for today. Hopefully you found this video that looks at the strengths and comparative weaknesses of these softwares. And hopefully it's been informative for those of you who are thinking of either adding one, both, or all of these softwares to your workflow, or are thinking from switching from one software to another. If you made it to the end of the video, thank you so much for watching. Really appreciate it. And I'll see you soon in the next video. Cheers.